Welcome to episode 22 of the Going for Broke Outdoors podcast, a podcast by an outdoorsman for other outdoorsmen. I'm your host, Jeremy Gillespie. Well, the show has some new intro music this week that was written and recorded by my good friend Rich Clark. If you like what you heard, Rich has two music projects that you can check out. The first one is called the Clark County Drifters, which has a bluegrass / folk / country vibe, and the second project is called Among These Ashes, and that project is distinctly heavy metal, and Rich actually just released his first full-length album. Well, I'm excited about today's episode where I talk with Beau Martonik. If that name isn't already familiar to you, Beau is a Pennsylvania native and the founder and host of the East Meets West Hunt podcast. I had a chance to meet Beau over the summer of 2021 out in Montana, and we talked a little hunting, and I knew that he was someone that I wanted to hear more from. Beau is a great whitetail hunter who specializes in big woods and mountain buck tactics. In this episode, we discussed the origins of Beau's podcast, the importance of physical fitness, adventure hunting, the sacrifices it takes to make hunting a priority in life, tactics for big woods and mountain bucks, trail camera strategies, and a whole lot more. This is a killer episode, and I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. Two quick notes. First, I've been getting a lot of questions about what gear I use and why. I've added a new page to my website titled My Hunting Gear List that details almost every piece of gear I use and some of my favorite features of each piece of gear on that list. I'll put a link to the new page in the description. Second, I have a new blog post out on my website about my top 10 tips for postseason scouting. If you're looking to level up your postseason scouting this year, head on over to my blog and give that one a read. I'll post a link for that as well. Today's podcast is brought to you by Stealth Outdoors at www.stealthoutdoors.com. Visit the Stealth Outdoor store to outfit your mobile hunting setup with some silencing gear. Sadly, hunting seasons are closed, but February is a fantastic time to inventory your gear and make upgrades for the upcoming season. If your gear isn't already sporting stealth strips, what are you waiting for? Thousands of satisfied hunters have silenced their gear using the products from Stealth Outdoors. Designed with the mobile hunter in mind, Stealth Outdoors manufactures climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, and stealth strip rolls for all of your miscellaneous silencing needs. Don't let unwanted noise get you busted this season. Visit www.stealthoutdoors.com to silence your gear and to place your order today. And now, on to the podcast. All right, today on the phone, I got Beau Martonik. Beau, for the listeners that aren't already familiar with you or your podcast, give us a quick intro of who Beau Martonik is, what he's about, and a brief overview of your own podcast titled East Meets West.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. Well, first of all, I guess I should say that I got to meet you in person this past summer. I was out visiting my brother in Montana, and both of you guys are kind of transplants out there. So it was good to get to meet you and watch the rodeo there.
Yeah, that was a good time for sure.
But as far as the background on myself, so I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm from basically the middle of nowhere, north central Pennsylvania, and I've grown up hunting whitetails and turkeys for the most part. And it's always been something that I had no other choice. My family and everybody here, we had our family deer camp, and just hunting whitetails was kind of a way of life, and grew up shooting guns and bows at a very young age and shooting competition archery when I was very little, and then just kind of moving into trying to learn how to do it on my own after watching my dad for a lot of years. And the area that I'm in is a little bit different than typical whitetail country, and it's all big timbered areas, and some of it's pretty steep Appalachian type mountain country. Some of it's a little bit flatter, swampier, big woods country, but there's a variety of it. It's something that I love doing, and eventually it kind of led me to wanting to expand and go out west. Before 2016, I had never been west of the Mississippi River, never seen the mountains, the Rocky Mountains before. Just decided to plan first elk hunt and went and did it, and didn't come home with anything. But that trip there, we did 7-day backpack trip, which is something I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend for your first hunt, but it was something we wanted to do, and it just has brought me back every year since. I haven't missed a year to go out west. And when I started hunting out there, I realized that there was kind of a gap in information as far as for someone, from the East or the Midwest to be able to plan these Western style hunts. And there was a lot of information out there, don't get me wrong, but I felt like it wasn't as relatable because it was mostly, Western hunters talking about it. So I'd actually wrote a story on it, just for myself. I wrote a story about, I titled it East Meets West. I think my brother was actually the one who came up with the name, and just talked about that elk hunt. And I submitted it online to the Journal of Mountain Hunting, which was at the time a podcast and online journal that I liked to listen to and check out their stuff. And Adam, the editor, ran a story there. And when I shared it on social media, that's when I really learned that there's just this gap in information, and people were like, "Oh, I wish I had that kind of money to do that, or I wish I had the time, or this and that." And I was like, it wasn't that expensive, and anybody could go and do it. It just need to learn how to do it. So long story short, that kind of started me thinking about starting the podcast, East Meets West Hunt. And so I was like, I want to be able to talk to successful hunters from all over the U.S., whether it's for, planning Western hunts or, in the home state of Pennsylvania and the Appalachian Mountains, talk to these people that are more successful than myself and know a lot more than myself, and me just be curious and ask questions that other people want to know answers to selfishly improve myself and learn more and get better, but also with the mic on and being able to put it out there, help others be able to do that as well. So kind of a long-winded intro there, but that's kind of the background.
No, I appreciate all the information, Beau, and a lot of things that you said there that I want to circle back around to that I can relate to myself, and took some notes. The first one is talking about the culture in Pennsylvania. And I know growing up in Michigan, I always explain it to people that aren't from Michigan or Pennsylvania or New York, some of these really big states with huge hunter populations. I always explain it to people. It's like, if you grow up in a rural area in one of those states, it's not a hobby or a sport. It's like a religion. And it really is, it sounds like that's been your experience as well.
Oh yeah, you're 100% right. I like I said, just didn't have a choice. And our deer camp is like one of the coolest things. As I said a little bit earlier, my entire family is just so big into hunting, and we go there, from October when it starts through December. From archery season to rifle season, we're there on the weekends and some weeknights after work or after we're done hunting. And it's just something I've never changed. And I've always heard that Michigan is very similar to Pennsylvania when it comes to that hunting culture and, the type of people, everything else.
Yeah, the deer camp atmosphere is real big, and it's more about getting together and the hunt and the social experience than it is so much trophy hunting. Like, it's kind of shifting that way where there's more people, especially the younger generation, that seem to be a little more interested in like QDMA type tactics. But the old school guys, for sure, it's just like get together, have the camp, drink some beers. If you get a deer, great, but it's very social too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's one of the things that I like so much about rifle hunting. Our gun season is when like the most people come to camp. And it's that time where like most of the year I'm so focused on, basically hunting by myself and hunting for a specific goal as far as like what my target is or what I'm trying to accomplish with it. And when it comes down to gun season, that's like a whole different thing. Like the actual hunting part or what you're trying to accomplish, I guess, with hunting doesn't matter as much as being able to be around the family and friends that you share deer camp with and sharing stories and cooking food and just hanging out and hunting together, where, like I said, archery season is more of like a solo endeavor for me, and getting to go out with, some of your buddies and stuff. It's just like they're both great. I love them both, but it's just a different feel.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that I always try to emphasize to like people that are trying to get other non-hunters involved in hunting. It's like, that's the kind of atmosphere, in my opinion, that draws people in, like the camaraderie and stuff. People don't want to come in and hear about QDMA and don't shoot this deer because it's not 3.5 years old. Like, don't get me wrong, I want to shoot a big buck as bad as the next guy, but it's like important to kind of communicate that to new people, the atmosphere more than the trophy hunting.
I can definitely agree with that. It all depends on your level and what your goals are. And with new people, they're not going to come in, if the way that you're, I guess, showing them, or the way you're teaching them in camp is like, oh, you only shoot this caliber deer, you do that. I just think that's setting them up for failure, because it's not easy. And, if you've done it for a while, then you have that experience and you're able to accomplish that and go for those types of goals. But at the beginning, man, that's hard, and that can discourage people from continuing to hunt. And I don't like that part of it.
Yeah, exactly. You don't go straight to the NBA or the NFL. You gotta play the juniors first.
100%.
One of the other things that you mentioned in there in the initial question, Beau, was people thinking or saying to you, "Oh, I wish I had that kind of money, and it's so expensive." That's something that I thought initially too, but now it's something I want to get into also a little bit later in the podcast. There's a lot of ways to cut out expenses and like unnecessary things. So we're going to touch on that for sure. And then one of the last things that I heard you say that I could really relate to is like the podcast motivation, kind of having that dual-edged sword of being a little bit selfish and also wanting to share and give back to the community, because that it's really similar to why I started. I wanted to call hunters or talk to these guys and have deeper conversations with people that I wouldn't otherwise talk to. And I was like, well, having a podcast would be a great way, or a great excuse to call these guys up and look at them. I'm talking to you right now.
We could have picked someone better for that, but I can relate to what you're saying there. It's like, how else would I get a chance to talk to these people and get to pick their brains and dive deep into it? Like, it makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes here. One of the questions I have for you, Beau, on your YouTube channel, you've got a video you posted, and it's older now. I've watched a lot of your content, probably 2 years ago. That's titled "The Why Behind East Meets West Hunt," and it's a Beau Martonik interview. You said a few things in that video that also resonated with me, and I want to touch on some of those. First, one of the things you mentioned in that video, there's a segment that talks about the physical challenges of hunting and mountain hunting specifically, and that gives a guy a little different perspective on everyday life. I'd like you to expand on that and discuss how hunting and mountain hunting has shaped you as a person.
Yeah, so what I meant by that line is like, so when it comes to mountain hunting and hunting in the West and some of these places, like it's physically demanding. It's hard. You're not taking a vehicle up to the top of this hill. You have to, every step is earned. Everything that you do is on you to be able to do that, which for me, I realized that like, okay, I want to be in the best shape as I possibly can to be able to do that. And I've always been into fitness. Like that's been something that's been important to me since I was in high school. But what mountain hunting taught me is to be the best that you can be. I'm not saying physical fitness is everything to it, but it is a big part. It's a big part of enjoying your experience. Better shape that you're in, the more that you'll enjoy that experience. And so that led me to being disciplined and working out every day. And when I say that, it's like, it doesn't have to be 2 hours a day in the gym or whatever. It might be 15 minutes sometimes. It might be an hour. It might be 30 minutes. But every day so I have a regular job where I work anywhere from 9 to 10 hours a day. And the only time I could really find to get in is before work. So that made me disciplined to get up and get a workout in before I go to work. And it just kind of it sets your day differently when you get up and you accomplish something right away. You get your blood flowing, you're sweating a little bit, you're getting yourself moving. And that just helped me like realize like, okay. And I got in pretty good shape and I felt good. And I'm like, okay, when you're disciplined in these things, you can get better at it. And that just applies to, anything in life. And I look at any challenge or any goal that I want to accomplish as that and breaking it down into small pieces and just working out a little bit every day to be able to go there. So that's kind of what I meant by that.
I am admittedly not in the greatest physical condition these days, not the worst, but not the greatest. I've been in much better shape at earlier points in my life, and I think I'm actually quite a bit older than you. How old are you?
I'm 29.
29, so I'm 38, and probably I was in pretty good shape up until my mid to late 20s, and then I got a desk job and I've fallen off the wagon some. But but the mountains, they will let you know really quick what kind of shape you're in. So you can think you're in one kind of shape, and then as soon as you get out there, you find out what kind of shape you're really in. So that's a point I wanted to bring up to anyone that is considering a Western hunt, especially a mountain hunt. I mean, because not all Western hunts are mountain hunts. You know, you can hunt antelope or whatever. But commit early on in your planning or your preparation to some sort of physical fitness regimen. And whether that's, like you said, 15 minutes, 30 minutes of cardio every day, whether you're rucking on the weekend, something like start getting in mountain shape, because that will have a huge detrimental impact on your hunt if you are not.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. There's people that can tough it out and do just fine. But for me, I like it to be enjoyable, at least for part of it, you know. So the best, better shape I can be in, and it just puts you in a better mental state. It makes you more confident when you look at and you spot something across that mountain. You don't think like, oh man, I gotta climb all the way over there. I gotta do this. It is getting close to dark. I probably won't make it in time. You start coming up with these things in your head. When you're confident about it and you feel good, you go and do it, and it creates more opportunities. And I just can't see how that could be argued.
Yeah, so that was a great point from that video, and I thought that's real important, especially for people that, my audience is largely whitetail hunters, but there are a lot of people that ask me questions about hunting out west, probably similar to what you experienced. So I wanted to bring up some of those topics today. And something else you said in that video, kind of unrelated, but from that same video, you used a term that's near and dear to my heart, which is adventure hunting. I'd like to hear what adventure hunting means to you, and what is the appeal for that to you personally?
Adventure hunting is funny because I feel like I've defined it into myself when I think about it as a bunch of different ways. But adventure hunting to me is kind of going into, as cliche as it sounds, kind of going into the unknown and something that's challenging, and seeing new places and being able to experience new things. And even when I say that, it doesn't mean like every adventure hunt's in a new place, but every time you go on these types of hunts, that you have new experiences, or you see something differently if you fully engulf yourself in it. Because like on a regular day or in your everyday life, you kind of get in these ruts or these just emotions of things where when you go on these types of hunts, you're really able to disconnect and be able to see things that I feel like not a lot of people in the world get to see. And that's where I keep coming back to it and keep driving to go on more adventure hunts.
Yeah, and that, like I said, that really resonated with me. I started traveling in like 2013 or 2014. I'm from Michigan, so Ohio was like the first out-of-state hunt I went on. But it was different enough where I was like, oh, this is a lot of fun. And then since then, I've been to a whole bunch of states: Kansas, the Dakotas, Montana, hunted in Iowa this year, so all over the place. And I really enjoy it. And that's probably one of my favorite things about hunting now, is just going to like tackle new terrain. It's fun to hunt different species, get out there, and inevitably, and I want to hear your experience on this, it seems like overall it's made me a much better hunter, hunting different areas, different terrain, different species. Has the same thing happened to you?
Oh yeah, I totally agree. And like, it doesn't even matter what the species is, even if it's completely different, there's things you can pull from it to apply to it. For me with whitetails has been my bread and butter, what I've done my whole life, but elk hunting has taught me so much about whitetails. And, even getting a better feel for the wind and thermals, and understanding that, and just in different tactics as far as being on the ground and also, hunting off the ground a little bit more, and different things that I've pulled from going to these different places to apply back home. And actually the first state that I ever traveled to out of state was Ohio myself. And that was I think that was in 2014 when I did that. And that just kind of, when I started hunting there, I'm like, okay, And I brought some things I learned there back to PA, and then that led to going to these other places. And it's just, I feel like it makes you more well-rounded for sure. And if you let it teach you things to apply and think outside the box, I think it can be really beneficial.
Yeah, that's a great attitude and a great point there. Like, let it teach you. Just, I mean, everybody has like their hunting style and preferred methods, but don't go in with set in stone, real rigid preconceptions of what's going to happen. Just kind of let the experience dictate some of these things. And for sure, like I said, I've learned a ton, and it sounds like you have too.
Yeah.
So last thing I want to cover from that video, in making these types of adventures and hunting experiences a priority. And along with that, for most guys, and we talked about this a little earlier, that means sacrifice or trade-offs. So talk to me about some of the sacrifices and trade-offs that you've made or that the average guy can make to help these Western hunts become a reality.
Yeah. So you can really go on a bunch of different scales here, and it all depends on where you're at in life and things to determine what it is for you. But I think the first thing I'll say is, I don't like when people just be like, oh, well, that person's got this going for them, so that doesn't apply to me, or that can't work. It's not the idea of exactly what somebody says, more so is the idea of it and thinking in that type of mindset, So like for me, one of it is when I first got out of college, and I bought everything I could once I got my first job. I thought I was rich, and I bought a new truck, and I bought a side-by-side, had loans for all this stuff. I'm like, I can't afford anything other than paying off this stuff. And at that point, it didn't feel real. Like I could go on these hunts. Once I sold my side-by-side and used that money to pay off my truck, and I started doing, and now I still drive the truck that I've had for a while. I don't have any payments on it. And, I bought a moderate house. I didn't buy anything that was out of my means that I have to have this ridiculous payment for. And just little things that every time, like if I go to purchase something, like I don't have many toys, like as far as that I know many other people do. I don't have a boat. I don't have a snowmobile. I don't have any of these types of things. And I would love to, and I don't wrong anybody for doing so. But if hunting and adventure type hunting is something that means a lot to you, there are sacrifices you got to make unless you just have, a bunch of money. And again, those things are just examples that relate to me, but I'm sure there's something in someone else's life that they can think about on what you could cut out, because like to save up, I used to say it was like $1,500 to go on elk hunt. It's a little more now, probably about $2,000. And depending on where you live in the U.S., gas is the biggest variable with that now. But, to be able to do that and put that money aside, over a year or two's time frame, like you can make it happen if you think about it and you lay it out. So that's kind of for me what I would say on that, and what I meant from some of the sacrifices, and for me, like I've tried to make extra money on the side, and whether that's having a side business, like that I've started with the podcast and everything, and it could be anything else, something small. It doesn't have to be something along those lines. It's doing something which can sacrifice time and stuff, but I look at what my goal is and figure out, what I need to do to achieve that. And I don't look at it as I'll never be able to obtain that. I just look at how can I obtain that, and, see if it means enough to want to go for it.
Yeah. A bunch of great points there. And again, I think maybe when I ran into you over the summer there, it's like certain people you just know you got like this common bond with or shared experience. And I could tell, like, I was like, this guy gets it, for humble beginnings, like you're grinding, you're getting out there, you're making things happen. And I just want to touch on a couple of points, because you're bringing up a lot of great points, Beau. And the first thing, I think it's Henry Ford. There's a quote that says something like, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right either way. And going back to what you said earlier about mindset, like people say, oh, I can't do that. Well, you're right. You can't do it. And if you want to do it, you'll find a way to do it. So I'm a numbers math nerd kind of guy. And you talking about the elk hunt, $1,500. I like to put things in perspective, like break it down. It's attainable. So there's 52 weeks in a year. If I worked 2 hours a week, that'd be 104 hours. If I made $15 an hour at a side job, there you go. That's your $1,500 for your elk hunt. So do you want to work 2 hours extra a week to go on an elk hunt? Like, that's not that big of a sacrifice. And a lot of that is mindset. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it like that, right? 2 hours a week and I can go on an elk hunt in the Rockies. Like, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah. Oh man, that's exactly right. I'm glad you broke that down, because I had some notes I presented on this at one point, and I couldn't remember. I had it all broke down, but I couldn't remember exactly the numbers, so I didn't want to. I'm not as good as math, so I have to have things written down to remember the exact details of it. But I totally agree with your point there.
And then another thing, and it sounds like you hunted Colorado, and Colorado's still an over-the-counter state, but if you want to go to a draw elk state, like let's say Wyoming, where you might need 2, 3, 5 points, those numbers get even better, because you can start buying a point for $50 a year or whatever the elk points cost in the state you're looking at. And now you've got a 3-year or a 5-year horizon to save up that money. And now you only, you need a half an hour a week for 3 years or whatever.
Exactly. And again, it just depends on what you want and how you can commit to it. I mean, one of the big things for me, Jeremy, is investing in knowledge and learning, and whether that's on YouTube or taking, an organized course or whatever. I mean, just the last month I had joined Cody Rich's, he had a course about entrepreneurship and creating side gigs and stuff. And that's something that's also interests me. And I wanted to learn how he preaches how to basically not trade time for money and be able to make money with less time. And it sounds like a gimmick, but it's not. And, I learned something from it. And those are the types of things that, like, throughout the years, I always just try to learn more and try to understand different ways. And maybe I could make a little money here to help me do this, or not all about money, but those are just different ways that I've kind of looked at things and trying to invest in learning. Because no matter, like, when I started the podcast, I knew nothing about podcasting. I still don't know a ton about the audio side of it. And you and I were talking before this, and that doesn't mean that because I don't know everything that I can't do it. Like, you learn as you go, and you can do things. You just gotta put your mind to it and say you're gonna do it, and you're set a date that you're gonna do it, or whatever, and then figure out how to make it happen. But I'm just such a big believer in mindset and just truly being confident in it. And there's one thing, I mean, sometimes I feel like I do have a little bit of blind confidence when I shouldn't, but, and that can get you in trouble, but, having confidence in it, and if you're willing to put in the work and figure it out, I don't see how you can fail in that.
Yeah. And again, saying a bunch of stuff that really resonates with me personally. It's like, you don't have to be an expert. You just have to be competent, and being competent and being an expert to me are pretty different things, right? Like, are you a capable driver of your everyday vehicle? That sure, then you're competent. Does that mean you can race NASCAR or Formula One? Probably not. Like, you don't have to be perfect. And that's another one of my favorite one-liner cliche type sayings is perfection is the enemy of progress. I see so many people that want to go on these types of hunts, and it sounds like you did it initially. I know I did it initially, and maybe we can talk about that a little more. It's like planning out a 7-day backpack hunt. You probably researched it to death, went over all the gear, bought more gear than you needed, took more gear than you needed. And it's like, at the end of the day, you just need to do it, right? You just need to get going.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm by design somebody that overthinks things, and I still do it. Like, I still do things where I start planning so much that I get overwhelmed with it, and then you do nothing. There's a part of it where, being able to, like you said, not be perfect, but get good enough and just try it, do it, and then you learn and you get better over time, and then you can tweak things and identify where your weaknesses are and get better at it.
Yeah, and on that topic, we mentioned earlier in the podcast, I wanted to come back to that. Talk to me about your first elk hunt, and specifically, I'd like to know like your gear loadout and what you take now, and how has that kind of evolved over time? Like, what did you think you needed, and what do you think now that you have experience over a couple of years? What's really important to you now versus what you thought was going to be important? Before we hear about Beau's out gear, I want to take a break to mention huntingbeastgear.com. Co-founded by the big buck serial killer himself, Dan Infalt, Hunting Beast Gear features state-of-the-art manufacturing techniques, the highest quality materials, and innovative designs that have been engineered, field-tested, and refined to perfection by a group of the best mobile hunters on the planet. www.huntingbeastgear.com delivers cutting-edge products including Beast Gear climbing sticks with weight reduction holes designed to deliver incredible durability in a lightweight stick. Beast Gear climbing sticks also feature non-staggered, inline stacking, and double steps, all in a 2.2-pound package, which includes the fastening strap. HuntingBeastGear.com has also released the game-changing Beast Gear Hang-On Tree Stand. Designed to be the ultimate hang-on tree stand solution, with 4 years of prototyping, testing, and refinement, the Beast Gear stand features a 16-inch wide by 29-inch long platform. The stand comes in at an incredible 6.8 pounds, and it does all that without compromising strength or durability. The Beast Gear stand is finished with a long-lasting anodized coating and features grade 8 hardware, high-quality Delrin washers, beast buttons, and adjustment knobs. For more details and to place your order, head on over to www.huntingbeastgear.com today. Now, back to the podcast.
That's a good question. So my first elk hunt, there was some things that like I had researched gear to death, and I was working in an archery shop part-time at that point in my life, and so I got some discounts on things to be able to buy more. And that's literally why I worked at that archery shop, because I wanted good gear and I wanted a little bit of extra side money, which never really turned into side money. It turned into me usually trading it for stuff. But I got into the gimmick of like the lightest weight backpack that you could get, and which ended up breaking on the first, I think it was the first day of the hunt.
Oh, no.
I ripped the bag. My cousin talked him into buying the same one. His main belt buckle broke really early in the hunt, like a lot of things. And I'm like, okay, that was something that I skimped on or I looked at and was like, oh, I need the lightest weight, this, and wasn't necessarily, I didn't need a big giant like external frame on it, but I needed something that was a little bit more middle of the road. And so that was something that I had learned there. And another thing was I just packed too much clothes. I packed extra everything, like multiples. Like I packed, if I'm doing a 7-day hunt, I might pack 2 extra pair of underwear, a couple extra pair of socks. Then at that point, I was doing more than that, and I was having extra base layers, all this stuff. I'm like, okay, if I have a good merino wool or synthetic base layer and merino wool underwear and socks, like I can get more out of that. I just overpacked. I had a first aid kit that had a ton of stuff that I didn't know how to use in it. Those types of things. One thing that I felt like I did right on the first trip that I eventually did wrong and had to go back to it was I pack a ton of food. And I was like, I need to cut back on this food. It weighs a lot. It does weigh a lot, but food is so important. And you burn so many calories when you're in the mountains. So I've learned that I won't skimp on food. I'll bring as much food as I can. And that was just some of the things that I had learned from that first trip.
Yeah, the food's an interesting one because not only is that good for the body, but if things aren't going your way, especially on a mountain hunt or backcountry hunt, food is good for morale too.
Oh, it definitely is. Like I've seen people that do like the stoveless method, and they don't carry a stove and everything's kind of liquid or bars, and I'm like, no, not a chance, man. Right. Like that's my only thing. At the end of the day, I'm looking forward to is a hot meal or hot coffee in the morning. So it's that's not for me.
No, me either. And that's like, I think it's really important to understand yourself as a hunter and like your hunting style. Everybody, especially as you get older, like you kind of figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And that's different for everybody. I mean, there's some overlap, of course, but everybody kind of has their own hunting personality, like their regular personality. So if that's one thing that you need to get through some of those grinding moments or hard times, like by all means, some things are worth the wait.
Yeah, I agree. I'll never not take a little packable pillow with me because like sleeping good at night is important. That was another thing. I took a really lightweight sleeping pad on that trip. That every time I rolled over, my shoulder was like digging into the ground, and I struggled sleeping, and I was always waking up with my shoulders hurting and everything. And I, eventually got one. It was a few ounces heavier, but it was thicker, and I was more comfortable, and I could get a good night's rest. So that was important.
Some of those things you can't help but learn by through experience. And again, that's like the just get going. The first year, you're going to learn so much about what works for you, what doesn't work for you, which gear worked, which gear didn't work. And it's like the sooner you get that first year under your belt, the sooner you can, grow from those experiences.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, Beau, let's switch gears here. We'll talk about your bread and butter, which is whitetails. And one of the many reasons that I was excited to talk to you is your knowledge on hunting big woods mountain bucks in places like Pennsylvania. So you recently published an article, I guess it's been a few weeks now, titled History Kills Big Bucks. And for those who haven't seen or read that article, it's on the Wired to Hunt website. So tell us what that article is about and maybe expand a little more on any tips or tactics that you didn't have time to fit into the article about how you leverage history to target a specific buck or an area itself.
Yeah, so I've just come to learn, like, I love hunting new areas. Like, hunting new areas is so fun. I love scouting new areas. But when it comes down to it, if you're targeting a specific buck or you're trying to be successful year in, year out, there's a lot to be learned from hunting the same area year after year and learning it and being able to adapt to it. And I always kind of look at going into an area as I always give an area like a 3-year strategy. So like I'll go in and the first year is kind of an exploratory year. I might not even hunt it, but I'll scout it. I'll scout it in the spring. I'll be walking around, checking for signs, setting up trail cameras, doing those types of things, and then trying to hone in a little bit more. Okay, so if I ran, a couple cameras over on this ridge, one on the bottom, the one on this other side here, and okay, this one area on the side hill was really good at this time of year, and there was some nice bucks going through here. Maybe I want to, shift some of those other cameras that were less productive, into this area and try to really hone in on, say, a specific deer or just if you're hunting, bucks in general and being able to learn from that, like, okay, this scrape was hot at this time of the year. How am I going to focus in on it and taking that information and continually learning from it and then just adapting to what you're seeing and what you're finding and continually move on it. One of the things that I had referenced in that article, I believe, was last year, I killed my nicest archery deer in Pennsylvania to date on the opening day. And that deer it was killed on opening day, but at the same time, it was killed prior to that from the previous year of scouting when I first found this buck, and he was in this area specifically in the late season when they had a new logging cut and he's feeding in it. He liked this trail, and this trail that he liked, I was going through my camera photos. I would log when he was moving through there, what the weather conditions, what the wind direction was doing. And I noticed he liked a southwest wind where it was quartering to his face when he'd leave this in the morning and head back to his bedding area. And so when I went in the summertime in the springtime, I went in and I ended up finding both of his sheds. I found one in like March, another one in turkey season, about 600 yards apart. And when I was in that area, I had set up a camera again in the same spot where I had gotten in the late season, but I set it up in that summer. I hadn't been back to it until that opening day, but I knew that food source, that newer clear cut was still going to be prime for them because I've learned some of that browse is good, in the late season as it is in the early season. And in this particular area, didn't have any acorns that year, so I knew the acorns weren't going to pull them off of that type of food source. So really the weather seemed good. The wind direction was the direction he liked to travel on, and I used that information to go in and set up on that deer and end up killing him within the first couple hours of the day on opening day. And it was just by taking that knowledge that I had from history and being able to apply it is what led me to having that opportunity. Now, more times than not, it doesn't always work out, the first sit in or whatever it might be, but you always learn something to be able to keep moving on.
Yeah, and I think the overarching lesson, or what I'm hearing from you, and this is something I've been trying to stress to people that I communicate with or my friends hunting, it's like critical thinking. You don't always get it right. Like you said, you don't always have the right answer, but when you take all the information that you have available, and something that I noted when you were talking about that is you recognize that if there was acorns, that could shift the pattern, but because you knew there was no acorns in the area, that there's a very good chance he's going to hold the pattern you'd seen him on previously.
Yeah, no, exactly. And patterning deer in big woods is not typical and not easy by any means. So I try to, like for me, I feel like for some people it would take like, okay, that deer showing up on camera 3 days in a row to make a move on it. That's just not the case in the big woods most of the time. Like a buck might hit a scrape, in the end of October once or twice in daylight and over a 10-day span. But, I pay attention to that weather. I pay attention to the wind. I pay attention to the dates and an upcoming year. When similar conditions arise, that's a spot that I want to focus in on. And again, that might not work out, but I'm trying to look at those odd multipliers and seeing how I can best put those chances in and do it. And you might need to repeat those thought processes in different spots or the same spot multiple times before it works out. But it's, like you said, kind of critically thinking about it and making reasonable assumptions to go in.
Yeah, I love that phrase. I'm going to steal that. Odds multiplier. That's a good one.
So I stole that. So that's not my phrase. It's actually a podcast guest that I had on, Mark Livesay. He has an e-scouting elk course that I'd taken, and he uses that term a lot. I think it's so awesome and applicable. So I use it and I steal it from Mark. So
well, if it's already stolen, I won't feel bad about stealing it again.
Yeah, it's free speech. You're good.
Yeah, but to that point, odds multiplier, like that's how I think about it too. Let's say on any given hunt with no scouting and no preparation, you have like a 1% chance of killing a deer. Well, now you've got some history, some trail camera history on the area. Maybe you've ruled out some areas because, like you said, some years there's an acorn crop, some years there's not. Now you might be up to 5%. And let's say now you've got 10 or 15, or some of these guys got 25, 30 different areas where you're on a buck generally, where you know that buck's around, it's a shooter buck. And if you're rotating through these spots where now you've got a 5 or 8 or 10, whatever percent chance it is of killing that deer, but every time you go sit in an area, you've got that chance versus a guy that's got the 1% chance. It's like, to me, that's the difference between the guys that are having occasional or real sporadic success to when you look at guys that are getting it done year after year. It's like, that's the difference right there. They're not doing anything super top secret. They're putting in the work, grinding and accumulating that data and making informed decisions with that data.
And it's so true. Like, we can overcomplicate things a lot. Like us as whitetail hunters can overcomplicate things, including myself, and overthink things to death. And a lot of it comes down to that persistence and just reading what you're seeing, like looking at what the deer's sign and the information that's put in front of you, and logging that whether in your head or in your notes or in an app or something, and then being able to apply that and learn from it and just keep doing that. I mean, I got into the whole ordeal. It was probably, I don't know, 4 years ago now. I was like, I got into my own head because I was hearing so much people talk about bouncing around and, only sitting in the same tree once and doing these things. And I started doing that, bounce around all these areas and doing this. And I was like, I was just chasing my own tail. I just wasn't getting anywhere. And I'm like, I need to go back to, when I say that, I'm not saying that doesn't work in specific areas or whatever, but I had to go with what I knew, and that wasn't working in in the areas that I was hunting, and in lower deer density areas like you find in the big woods. You're not risking spooking deer as much by hunting the same tree over and over again. But deer aren't on these patterns of every day. They might only come through once every 5 days. So sometimes it takes sitting there over and over again until you have that encounter, that success. And I think a lot of that comes down to having confidence in your spots enough to make it right in your own mind that it's okay to sit there for longer than you would if you were just kind of blindly guessing.
Yeah, and I've noticed that as well, because like coming out west, you hear, living in Michigan, like, oh, Iowa, Kansas, like all these big deer, and maybe you've experienced this as well. Like I know PA has a really high population of deer, not necessarily trophy deer, but a lot of deer in general, and so does Michigan. So when I started going to like Ohio or Kansas, the deer densities were way lower, and I think you got to take that into account because, you know, you talk about bouncing around. So what I like to do personally, and this will vary by area, but I do bounce around a lot, but I bounce around until I find a deer. And assuming I don't screw it up the first time or get winded, then if I have good access, I get back in that area. Maybe not that exact tree, but I'm talking like 5-10 acre area. I want to get back in where that deer was, because until you screw it up, my opinion is they do stick around that area pretty tight. And even if you screw it up once, sometimes they still come back there. Have you experienced anything like that?
Yeah, and one thing I will say about that, so like in Pennsylvania, it depends on what part of the state you're in. So like where I'm at, deer densities are low, like you're finding like in Ohio and some of those other places. So that does vary, and mostly like what I'm referencing to are areas that you do have this history in, that you are confident in some of these spots. My strategy is a little bit different when it comes to if I'm traveling out of state and I don't know the area as much, or if it's a new spot that I'm going into, I'm going to bounce around a little bit until I'm finding deer. Because, you know, if I'm just going to go in and sit in the same tree in an area where I don't know if there's any deer in day after day, that's hard, and that's not really productive. So I agree with like what you're talking about with going in and when you find a deer. And for me, like I don't worry about bumping deer. If I bump a deer, especially when I'm going in and scouting it, I don't believe that they typically, you know, leave the country. And that's just my opinion. I don't believe that they take off and completely leave the country. Maybe some do, but I believe if you do it a couple times, then they're starting to get educated. But they had a safe area, they got away, they come back a lot of times.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. They don't leave the country. They might become a little more nocturnal, or they might use a different part of their range. But as far as like establishing a whole new home range or core area, I think that is real rare, like you said, unless there's repeated pressure or, you know, really bad encounters for them.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, or maybe maybe if you catch him sleeping and you walk up about 10 yards and he jumps about 5 feet in the air because he's so afraid, maybe that might be a different story. But
right. Well, aside from history, which that's certainly a key component in your tactics toolbox, what other tactics have helped you tip the scales in your favor when hunting these mountain bucks? And one thing that we've kind of touched on briefly, and I'd be more interested to hear some details, is how you're using your trail cameras and how valuable or, you know, not valuable do you think that is as a tool for mountain bucks specifically?
I think trail cameras are huge. I think trail cameras can be a big benefit in confirming that if you're hunting a specific deer, that he's in the area, or even just learning an area. I think trail cameras can be really big. And for me, when I'm into a new spot, I run cameras a little bit differently, where I try to cover different. If it's an area that has a lot of terrain, I'm trying to cover different levels of terrain. I might have one on a community scrape in a creek bottom. I might have one a third of the way up the point of the ridge on a scrape that I find, and then I might be up a little bit higher on a bench system, and where I find, you know, normally you'll hear me say scrapes a lot because I put cameras on scrapes 90% of the time, and then I'll have one on the top, you know, maybe where it funnels movement down, and I'll use that to learn. But I don't use cameras usually to the point of real-time data or like acting on data I find right then and there. I mostly use it for learning in the future or for the next season. So that's why I do that. And then I'll learn, as I kind of mentioned earlier, a little bit with, if one area is better, I see deer on a certain terrain level moving or a buck's going there. I'm like, okay, maybe he's, bedding out on this point at this elevation level. And I need to focus more on that. Maybe run a camera on a different side of this point on the same elevation level, the next year, and kind of using that as the tool. There's factors that come into play with that as far as you need to pay attention to or ask questions like, why was he traveling there? Is it because there was only acorn crop on this part of the hill? Was it because there's cover out there that they can, bed in, or he's traveling through cover? What ask those questions and learn from it. In areas that don't have as much terrain, that's just big timber type places, I usually am setting them up on a bunch of different edges, on the edges of clear cuts or hemlock and conifer trees and swampy bottoms or whatever it might be. I try to split them up on that first year and then hone in onto a smaller spot in year 2 and 3 in those places where I might have, where cameras are spread out that first year. That next year I might have 3 or 4 cameras or even more in a very small area, some of them being within eyesight of each other, and honing in around, say, a logging cut that I think the buck could be bedding in, or around an oak ridge that has some acorns that are dropping, or whatever that might be. Then I get a little bit more surgical with it and I'm throwing more cameras at a specific location. But the cameras are definitely a big part of my strategy. And the only time that I'm really, not the only time, but most of the time when I'm checking them on a more regular basis and using that information is during the rut, because I'm moving around a little bit and I'll check them on my way in, or in PA with not having Sundays to hunt, where I'm scouting on Sundays, I'll check them. And I'm more so looking at where the does are hanging out at for that specific occasion, and less so that if I would have a buck cruising through there. And more so for that real-time data is trying to find where the does are at that point.
So I want to touch on a couple things you said there. And the first one is you talked about maybe getting surgical, placing multiple cameras, possibly even within eyesight or on clear cuts and stuff. So I'd like to know, and I'm sure this is a it depends answer, right? There's a lot of those in deer hunting, but how do you balance pressure with your intel gathering, right? Like, how do you know where the line is, where you're not in that area so often, you're spooking those deer out of there with, or how often are you checking your cameras? I'm sure that depends too, but maybe talk about those items a little bit.
So, I'm really not checking cameras very often, unless it's during the rut where I don't feel like you're really spooking things as much, or have where it's lower risk. But most of the time, I don't really have 10-day or 14-day thing. Usually I'd say it's probably more so like 21 days that I'd go in and check some of these cameras, which usually doesn't help for the intel because it's old at that point. But it's more so kind of confirming what's in the area. But so I'm more of on the standpoint of leaving cameras out, and it might look like if you Jeremy would follow me on Instagram, I'm always checking cameras. That's because they're in different areas, and I'm kind of just rotating and checking those. I have one area that I have cameras out that I put out last April that I haven't been back to yet.
Right.
It all depends. I hate giving that answer, but it definitely does depend. I don't like to when I'm starting to get surgical with it and I'm closing in on a bedroom or something, I'm not trying to check those cameras very often. I will though, if it's a rainy day or something and I feel like I can get away with it a little bit more, then there's a chance that I'll go and try to check those cameras and try to confirm that the buck's using that area, and then I'm not completely out of the game. But a lot of times just the sign will tell you that too.
And then you talked about placing a lot of your cameras over scrapes. Now, are you doing anything to keep these cameras out of eyesight? Are you elevating them, camouflaging them, doing any scent prevention stuff?
A lot of sometimes I'll put them up in the air, but I've actually gotten away from that a little bit more. I did that more for the human pressure standpoint, but I feel like you miss a lot when you're angled down at them. But if I'm in a high hunter type area where there's a lot of pressure, I'll usually put them up in a tree high, or I'll like bury them into a stump. Might not even run a strap around, just set the camera inside a stump, so that it kind of camouflages a little bit more for the people. Now I have noticed that some deer just don't love cameras and they will get spooked by them, but that's not normally my initial thought, unless it's like, right in their face. If I'm running a camera perpendicular to a trail, then I'll run it at any level if it's not really in their face. If I have a camera that's like facing the trail and or running parallel to it, and the trail is like coming towards the camera, at that point is when I'm more so going to put it up in a tree and angle it down than I would if it was on the side of it. So that's kind of how I look at it in that different scenario, and then kind of use it that way.
No, that's a great tip there, like the perpendicular versus the head-on trail, because that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and the other thing you asked about scent control with it. Typically I'm wearing just like my regular gloves when I'm touching the camera, but I don't really pay attention. I don't spray them down or anything afterwards. Like when I'm making the scrapes or I'm freshening up the scrapes, I'm just using my leather boot to do so. I don't get too worked up on the scent part of it.
Yeah, not a lot of scent control going on this podcast. I've shot some of my biggest deer after days without a shower. So, I mean, I do think I do think there's merit to it, but I think if you're smart about it and play in the wind. But I have noticed on cameras specifically, like I don't run a lot of cameras anymore out west. I ran a lot more in Michigan, but I would try to keep them in like relatively low scent areas. Like I'm not going to leave them in my garage where there's gas or a bunch of foreign odors. And I would put them in my backpack and wear some sort of gloves and the gloves that are relatively clean. I think just keeping the oils from your hands off it does help. And that stuff fades away over time. But if you're putting them out, and I mean, so many people talk about, I don't get target buck pictures for 3, 4, 5 days, 7 days. And I think that's just like the oils from your hands kind of diminishing off the camera.
Yeah, no, that's definitely possible. And I don't want to say scent control is not important. I'm sure it does help, but it's just not something that I've paid a lot of attention to. I used to do it where I'd get changed outside the truck and do all that, and to me it just became a point where it was like I didn't see the benefit for the amount of work I have to put cold clothes on and everything to be able to do that every day. So with spraying down and I do spray down when I leave the truck, but it's more of a kind of mental thing that I think it's really adding benefit to it. And I don't know. I just don't know if some of those scent control measures are doing enough that it makes enough of a difference for it, because the deer are going to be able to really get your scent no matter what. It's almost impossible to get to zero. But I get the whole, if we go back to what we talked about earlier, I'm contradicting myself when I'm talking about, perfection and good. So
no, I'm same way. At one point I did scent lock and I wore the sprays and washed my clothes and scent free. And I think one of the things that's changed for me though, too, especially out west and even for whitetails, I hunt off the ground a lot more and like semi-mobile, even during the hunt, like where I'm doing almost still hunting. So I'm really cognizant of the wind and, almost always working either in a crosswind or into the wind. So it's just less of a factor for me. And out here, I do so much hiking. I'm a bigger guy, so I just sweat constantly. It's like, there's no way the scent control is working for me personally.
Yeah, I get you there.
Yeah. And back on the trail cameras, I had one more question. So I've seen you have done a lot of collaborations with Exodus, and those guys are really taking off, and they could put out a lot of great content too. I watch them pretty regular. Have you picked up any tips or tricks from those guys to help you use your trail cameras more effectively? And if so, what are they?
One of the things that is just running cameras on video mode, mostly because I felt like the cameras that I've used didn't take very good quality video, and it was just kind of difficult to transfer them over your computer. But I love those Exodus cameras where the video is clear and you learn a lot from video. As far as travel, you get understanding of the buck's posture and their kind of emotions that they have, whether they're hitting a scrape or just the way they're moving and walking. And that, there was a buck that another hunter ended up killing this past year. It was a buck that I was hunting, and I learned from the video trail cameras that he must have injured his leg, years ago, and he just walked with a limp, and you could kind of see that in his track. And I wouldn't have known that without seeing that on video. So that was something that I learned from those guys, and it's been a helpful tactic.
How long do you typically set your videos to? You doing like 10, 30, 60 seconds?
I'm doing usually 15 to 20. And that also depends on the angle that I have it at, as far as with the perpendicular or with parallel to the trail. Those types of things kind of matter as far as how I'll run that.
Okay. And well, let's shift gears again here. So that's trail cameras, and a lot of great tips there. Some things that I hadn't thought about, so appreciate you sharing those with me, and going to definitely take away one or two things from that discussion. But postseason scouting, so that's just around the corner, or maybe it's already started for you. Maybe it never stops, but what are you looking for specifically, let's say February through the end of April or whenever you get green up in your area? Are you looking at the macro picture? You're trying to dial in on details like exact beds, stand locations, maybe some combination of those? So what are you looking for personally this time frame of year?
If it's a new area, I'm looking at more of the big picture and trying to get ideas of where I'm going to go or where I need to focus on or where I need to try to run cameras. But if it's an area that I've been in before, I'm getting super focused on details and picking trees and there'll be a lot of times when I'll scout an area where I carry my climbing sticks and my saddle with me so I can climb in trees and see how it works out and understand that. So I focus a lot. I mean, postseason scouting, spring scouting is the time when I spend the most time in the woods. Every time I go in and do scouting, I log it. I have a Garmin watch. I turn on the tracking feature and I'll just keep running that and to log my miles throughout the year. And usually every spring I do somewhere, usually over 200 miles on my boots. I put a lot of time in that time frame. And I feel like that is really helpful for me lining up in the fall. There's caveats I will say with that is in areas like we talked about, food sources shifting. So you might find sign in one area where the following year that those food sources aren't there, which the sign might not be there. But if you're in an area where it's mostly browse and you don't even have any oak trees or anything or any mass crops like that, a lot of times that sign is relevant year after year after year.
Boy, you brought up a lot of great points about how someone can like attack a new piece of area. And I think, again, going back to finding out what works for you, how you're going to deploy those cameras. I did like specifically in the mountain areas, how you're talking about running them at different levels, like creek level, up a bench, higher up, maybe towards the ridge top. So that's something I wanted to follow up on. Have you noticed any consistency, like in the big woods type areas where you're at, certain features, terrain, vegetation, anything that's consistent where mature bucks kind of gravitate to those areas or that vegetation, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, just thick cover in general usually aligns that. But a lot of the problem is with these types of areas is there's a lot of thick cover. So certain areas that have more than others that I would notice is like areas that have multiple ages of clear cuts within them or logging cuts. Those type of areas I typically find more mature bucks, I think, because they have cover, they have food, they have all that kind of stuff there. It's difficult to hunt those types of places. And also different bench systems on the side hills. Like, so some more of those faint trails in areas that are on those side hills rather than specifically, say, on the top where there might look like there's a lot of sign, but those side hills have been where I've found a lot more of the the mature deer moving in daylight hours. So those are the types of areas that I like to focus on. But the areas that have the most diversity in vegetation a lot of times are places that are going to be focal points for me. And how I shift around those areas depends on the time of year. But an example of a terrain feature that can funnel deer movement in steep country is like where you see a draw or a steep cut deep cuts going up a valley, right where it's almost like near like cliff kind of going down in that steep valley, where it gets just up to the top of that and it starts to flatten out a little bit. There's always a trail that goes around that top. When I say to the top, I don't mean the top of the mountain, but I mean like the top of where that deep cut runs to. And that might be a couple hundred yards below the top of the mountain. But it has an area where it funnels deer movement, and trying to find some of those natural terrain funnels that are not necessarily super easy to be able to identify on the map, but those types of places are killer, and places that have where terrain and vegetation meet up are my absolute favorite. So like I like looking at imagery that a lot of imagery that has leaf off imagery. And so like, for example, one of the biggest things I've been helping out and working with the guys at Spartan Forge on their mapping app. And I said, whitetail hunters, like having leaf off imagery is such a big deal. So when they added that into the app, it's important. And the reason for that is because you can see that different, those vegetation types. You can see the conifer trees. You can see those hemlock trees. You can see the clear cuts. You might even be able to see mountain laurel, depending on how good the quality of the image is that's running through these spots. You can see the hardwoods, and you can see some of those swampy areas, and all that stuff lines up. And it's important to go in and kind of check those areas out. And once I have those places in mind, areas I've seen, you know, year after year, where those types of areas lend to having mature deer, then it comes to boots on the ground and kind of really focusing in on where the actual, my setup would be. And that varies from place to place, but just getting you in the right spot is the first step for me.
I can definitely relate to the tops of those steep draws. The first good buck that I ever shot was in Southeast Ohio, and I think the heads, that's why I call it the top or the head of the draw, especially if it's steep, and the steeper and nastier the draw, it's like you want down trees in it, and the nastier it is, the better. But around the tops of those, you could have a 200-300 yard wide hillside, on both sides of that, and then that deer's got to come up from lower, or, if he's 50 yards below it, he's not going to cross through that draw. He's going to come up and circle right around the head of that draw. And if those are, especially I think if those are below the top, because they don't seem to want to expose themselves as much on the tops of a ridge, those are killer places. That deer that I shot the first morning, I found that spot. I sat up right over top of it, which in hindsight was a mistake. And I had a deer come in like on top of me. There was a saddle there too. It was like a really killer spot because it was a saddle going over the hill, and then on one side of the saddle there was that steep draw, so it was like funneling deer through the saddle and funneling deer on the side hill. And the deer came through the saddle, and it was my first time on that property, and ended up busting me. So the next day I sat off that, where like the deer that'd be funneled through would come down the trail farther and end up killing the deer first thing the next morning. So those spots are great. And then in Iowa this year, I did a ton of boots on the ground scouting over a weekend where I walked, 25 miles in a couple days. And Iowa's got a lot of like really steep ditches, like cut bank ditches. And there was real heavy deer trail, like cruising sign, wherever you could get through that ditch without going down a 6, 8, 10-foot bank. So great tip there. And then one of the other things that you mentioned that I think is killer too is where you got terrain and vegetation converging, like where you've got a saddle next to a clear cut and a mature timber, right? That's what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, anytime you can get multiple terrain features, it's almost like 1 + 1 = 3, where you got the terrain and the vegetation working for you. those spots can be real killer.
Those odd multipliers again.
Yeah, there's that odds multiplier. And I was going to ask you, but you answered my own question there. Where do you get your leaf off imagery? So I don't have Spartan Forge yet. I've learned a little bit about it. Talk to me about their imagery, and leaf off I know is a huge thing for all the reasons you talked about. So do you know where they're sourcing that from, and how's your experience been with Spartan Forge using the app overall?
It's been good. So they source it from multiple different places, and one of the ones that I've been testing that hasn't been out to everybody else yet, but is through Bing. So I don't know if you remember, like actually years ago, some of the Bing maps that they had were really good for being able to see imagery and leap off imagery, and they just bought some of the mapping from them, sourcing it from them. And I don't remember some of the other specific places they got it from, but some of the imagery is so clear that when you zoom in on it, you can literally see the trees and the branches that are coming off of the trees, which is pretty cool to be able to. I was talking to Garrett Prawl, the DIY Sportsman YouTube channel there, and he's been helping with developing that, and he was showing us, like, you could literally see the tree that he killed a buck out of, and the limbs, and where he set up in the saddle and everything, and it was pretty cool. So that's been really important for me, is being able to see that and find mapping. I mean, up until that point, I'd always used Google Earth and going back on the historical imagery until I could find some time that didn't have leaves on it, which a lot of time when you're doing that, you're getting photos that are from 7, 8 years old, and you might not be able to see any cuts or anything else that's in there. So some of the mapping that they've been able to get is impressive. And they're going to be adding a feature where if you actually want to, Jeremy, like if you were to have an area and there wasn't, say, leaf off imagery available in it, where you could purchase specific maps or things for that area for you, be like an extra fee to be able to do it if they didn't have it available there. And then you could add it right into your app.
Oh, that'd be cool. Like a la carte imagery for your profile or whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that'd be a neat feature for sure. And I know, like you said, that is super important for guys that are e-scouting. So that'd definitely be valuable. All right. Well, I think we covered that topic pretty in depth, which I appreciate. Again, a lot of great tips, and I had high expectations, Beau, and you're delivering.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm glad I'm not disappointing you.
So, Beau, one of the things that we have in common is that we both run a podcast, and I'd like to know what have been some of your biggest takeaways or aha moments from hosting the East Meets West podcast.
I would say that just looking at the trends of the really successful hunters that I get to talk to, and seeing what those trends are, and like one of the things that I've learned from talking to hundreds of people now is that it's super simple. It's a tactic that anybody can apply, but it's just persistent and not giving up. And, whether it's on the backcountry hunt or it's whitetail hunting, not giving up until that, last bell rings, so to speak, and a lot of these guys are getting it done on the last couple days of the hunt or the last few hours of a hunt, but it's because they stick with it and they don't just, do it for 3 or 4 days on, a 5-day trip and be like, well, I gave it my shot, it sucked, the weather wasn't right, this didn't happen. That persistence is something that I've noticed. Another moment or thought, I guess, that I had is everyone's got their own attention to detail, but the successful people have attention to detail and things. And whether it's the way they pack their gear, whether it's the way they enter into their tree, whether it's whatever it is, they have these little quirks to them or these little details that they live by. And I found that to be something I see in common.
The persistence thing for sure. Like attitude is so important. I've been on quite a few out-of-state hunts now with a bunch of different people, and it's interesting to see like how they respond to adversity, because especially the first year, you talked about having like a 3-year plan, and I can relate to that 100%. I always call the first year tuition, right? I'm like donating my money to learn about this area. And
yeah,
whether that's in time or trail cameras or gas or whatever, like if I get something the first year, great. But I always call that like the tuition year. And then the sophomore year, it's like you kind of start to figure things out. And then by year 3, you're turning into a veteran. But especially in a new area, like a first time on an out-of-state hunt, like things very rarely go your way. Sometimes they do, but very rarely. And it's like, how are you going to keep your morale up and respond to adversity and keep a positive attitude? Because if you don't have a positive attitude, like you're getting out of your stand early, or maybe you're not as focused as you could be. And a lot of times that's the difference between, it's a thin margin between, I don't want to say failure, but not harvesting an animal and harvesting an animal. It's a pretty small line sometimes. And attitude, I think a lot of times, is the difference maker.
I would agree. That's so big. Attitude and confidence. Like these people that are getting it done, year after year, they always have a good attitude, or if, things aren't going their way, like you said, they're able to adapt and deal with that adversity and just figure it out. And I think that's really, really important. And that's one reason that I don't hunt with a lot of people. Like if I find people that I work well with, then I stick with them, because I've hunted with people that don't have great attitudes, or when it going gets tough, they're just, they blame it on this or that, and that makes it tough and brings you down too. So I think that's a good thing to add.
Yeah, for sure. Well, last deer tactics related question here, and I've been asking this one a lot lately. I like to get the distilled experience of everyone I have on in a few sound bites here. So give me your top 3 things that you have learned that have had the biggest impact on your success, i.e., what's the most bang for your buck, the lessons that you've learned?
That's tough, but I'd say one of them would be having confidence in a spot and giving the spot its due diligence. And I talked about that a little bit earlier, but when it comes to deer hunting, being able to understand that sign or having history with that area and having that confidence in sitting there, even if you're not seeing a deer 2 days in a row, that to be able to do that. So like for me is being able to have confidence in a spot and give it its due diligence and sit there for the time period that seems reasonable for that has been something I feel like that has led to success for me there. Another thing is just being able to ask the question why. That's not a specific tactic, but that's more of when you're reading sign or you see a deer bedded and you bump him, why was he bedded there? What was he doing? Some of those, sometimes you can't get those exact why answers, but if you ask that question more, you get more down to the root cause of why they might have been there, and you can learn from that. So I think asking yourself why when you're looking at sign or seeing a deer or whatever it might be is a super helpful tactic. And I think the third thing is, and this has been something that we've kind of talked about a bunch. I think people will understand that it's important to me is not spreading yourself too thin and focusing on an area or a few areas. I believe in having backup plans for everything, but not, having yourself spread across 8 different areas to cover and never really getting a full grasp on it. And trying to learn a couple areas very well and learning every square inch of it is something I think is extremely important.
Can't argue with any of those, and especially the last one. I feel like you almost get in tune with the environment when you spend a lot of time there, whether that's in the spring or the fall. And the more time and the more familiar you get with a certain area, it's like you kind of know when things are happening or get like a sixth sense almost. And it's hard to develop that if you are bouncing around a ton.
Yeah, and that's learned from experience.
Yeah. Well, hey, Beau, we're running up on, hour and 20 minutes here. I want to wrap up with a few final questions. So first of all is, I heard a rumor that you're planning a spring bear hunt in Montana this year. Any truth to that?
Yeah, there is truth to that. I don't think I've announced that anywhere except for I know where you got that from.
Right.
from my brother and or Tim. But yeah, I'm gonna go to Montana this year in May and do a spring bear hunt. Something I've always wanted to do, and I like turkey hunting, but I don't love it enough to want to hunt the whole month. I want to do some little bit of Western hunting mixed into it. So that's my plan. I'm gonna come out for 7-10 days or something and hunt the spring.
That's awesome. So have you hunted in Montana before, or this will be your first time?
No, but I plan on, if the draws go my way, spending a lot of time in Montana this year. I've been putting in for a special elk tag that I think me and two of my buddies should draw this year, and then hopefully get the combo tag as well to hunt mule deer. So like I'm trying to go all in on Montana while Kurt's living out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what? And we don't have to get too far into the weeds here, but you've talked about coming out in May. You got a plan of attack or any like general part of the state, central or western, obviously, is where most of the bears are at. And do you know that there is indeed a grizzly bear behind every tree in Montana?
Well, yeah. So actually, I don't have a good plan of attack right now for that. I haven't looked into it a whole lot yet, other than I know I also have an added benefit of my brother living there. And he has some spots that we were talking about checking out. It's going to be a little bit more laid back than I typically would do a hunt. We're planning on setting up like a truck camp type deal and hiking back to that every day and going in. But we mostly focused on the western part of the state for that type of hunt. But yeah, there is grizzly bears behind every tree. When I was down there, I mean, I was constantly having to fight them off. So I'll be prepared with that. I'm going to have bear spray hanging from my necklace, from my bino harness. I'm going to have it on my hip belt. I'm going to have a 45 slung across I'm going to have it all. So
yeah.
Don't worry, Jeremy. I'll be protected.
You can never be too safe. No. And
yeah.
In all seriousness, I think, and my understanding was before I moved to Montana was obviously I knew there was grizzlies here, but we've spent a lot of time out hunting, not always in grizzly country. And actually I don't hunt in grizzly country a ton. But I've hiked there a lot. My girlfriend has a death wish for me. I think she's trying to get my life insurance money or something. So she's always making me hike in grizzly country. And we've only seen one while out hiking. And actually, it was kind of scary because it was a juvenile bear. And the first thing I thought was, oh no, where's mom at? But it was must have been just, a freshly off the mom cub, whatever age that is, 2 or 3 years old. And it ran off, so that was a good grizzly experience there. But yeah, I haven't seen that many, but I've seen quite a few black bears, and obviously black bear's a different animal and not nearly as scary as a grizzly, so that's been good. Every black bear I've seen to date has run away very quickly, so that's good. Unless you're trying to hunt them, then running away is not so good.
Yeah, I've never seen a grizzly in the lower 48. I've seen them when I hunted in Alaska, but never in the lower 48. So we'll see. I heard they're a little more aggressive. So
yeah. So you talked about your brother who lives in Montana. That's actually how we met in person the first time. Any chance that you move out here yourself, or any Western plans? Or are you firmly rooted in PA?
I wouldn't say I'm firmly rooted in PA, but I don't see myself anytime soon moving out west. To be honest, the cost of living is pretty crazy in a lot of those western states now. It's become popular, and for me, my goal is to create more time to get to explore those places and see them, but not. I don't have any immediate plans to try to move there. I'll be honest. I like Pennsylvania. I don't mind it. I like the hunting. I like the areas. I like the seasons. It's pretty good for me. But I need a good dose of being out west every year, and that up to this point has been giving me a pretty good fix.
Yeah, that's awesome, and it's fortunate for you now. You have kind of a built-in base camp if you want to come hunt in Montana specifically.
Yep, that's the plan. Kurt's going to get a little annoyed from me showing up often, but that is what it is.
Well, last thing, Beau, I wanted to say that I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. Really enjoyed this conversation. And if people want to learn more about you or your podcast, give a shout out to your social media. Where can people find you at?
First of all, thank you for having me on. I'm pumped to get to talk to you on. Like I said, getting to meet you in person was cool, and spending some time with you there. But getting to talk some more detail hunting is always a good time. So thank you. But where people can find my stuff at, my podcast is East Meets West Hunt. You can find that on any of the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, all those different places, YouTube. Have a YouTube channel that's just under my name, Beau Martonik. I created that under my own personal Google account a while ago, and I can't figure out how to change the name to East Meets West, so it's under my name. And then also got a website, eastmeetswesthunt.com, and then you can find me on social media at East Meets West Hunt or at Beau.Martonik.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Beau. Like I said, I really appreciate the time, and hopefully I'll run into you this May and maybe help you pack a bear out or something.
Heck yeah. I hope to get to see you out there. I'm sure I'll be running into you in some of my trips out there to Montana.
All right, Beau. We'll catch you later. Thanks.